Bienvenue. Welcome once again to another property live stream. This one's Property Quorum, where we discuss and we talk around topics that are right in the zeitgeist as far as the property market is concerned. And nothing could be more apposite than the £250 leasehold cap, which I'm sure was intended to shake everyone's tree. I'm not sure it's going to do that, but to start us off, Hamish McClay.
Well, good morning to all of you, which is a strange time of day because most of our podcasts, as we know, go out just into the afternoon. So it's great to see you of a morning. It would be wonderful to say this glorious sunshine here in Oxfordshire, but back to the rain again. The rain in Vista falls mainly on the plain, I think. Never mind in Spain. It seems to me that this particular sort of week we're speaking about interruption. We had our podcast that was on Monday was speaking about the many people who are sort of put in a very difficult position, whether it be through remediation, whether it be decanting because their properties needed to be improved and aspects of that nature, and the impact on the health of those particular sort of people. Yesterday, Silas and I was speaking ostensibly on target on speaking about IPSA and what we do with personal sort of searches, and the particular subject there was more to do with the impact on solicitors that we could help with because of a want to change there, to change the flow of things. And here we are today, this morning, we're speaking about yet another change which is going to impact something. Ostensibly, I don't know how many hundreds of years we've had leasehold as part of what we have in this country. And it may well be that leasehold itself does need to be improved in some ways or another. But to impact it at this particular sort of time when so many other changes are going on, and then because many people rely on, it's assumed they're remarkably wealthy. They're not. People have set up things over their lifetime to create an impression. So they have retirement incomes coming through leasehold. It's part of the earnings of certain people. So it impacts on a large number of people, including those that live in particular properties, because it seems to be some kind of fallacy that, these landlords or these property sort of owners are remarkably wealthy and we can just keep imposing loads and loads of money, just put an additional challenge on it or cap this and cap that and all the rest of it. However, people need to survive. The owners of these properties need to survive. The freeholders need to survive. And if you take away one aspect of their income, they need to find another way of achieving it. And it causes disruption. And this particular one, when you think it's gone back hundreds of years, there is so much that actually sort of going on in the background. And this is one of the reasons why, of course, although we did have a government previously which didn't really want to introduce things, in a way, it had been intending to improve the aspect of sort of freehold and leasehold and common hold and all those things, and realised that it's so complex. There's so much more depth to it because of the total impact that it does have on not just a few people, but hundreds of thousands of people. It has a significant impact on throughout this country.
Wow. Silas, it appears that maybe this cap will have not the intended results, perhaps.
Yeah, interesting point, Gareth. So for me, what I feel that we're entering into at the moment is almost like a remain in the headlines of newspapers' politics rather than actually any substance. And so what I've seen floating around on social media and in the press is this headline grab of a reform of freeholds, and so that the general public won't be paying any more than £250 a year on ground rent. And if you speak to many freeholders, that's probably not the highest of their priorities in terms of outgoings. As Hamish has touched upon, you've got all sorts of other outgoings when you're a leaseholder, such as your service charges, such as your insurance that you have to pay, etc. And all of these costs can be disproportionately higher than the ground rent. And let's not forget, as if I can point to the Cladding Matters podcast that you guys do on Friday, what is being highlighted there is that there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of housing units that are not fit for purpose in the first place. And they are all leasehold properties. So if we're going to talk about reform, are we really reforming the right areas here? Or are we, grabbing a few headlines going, oh, this is a great innovation, which probably doesn't really affect a lot of people outside London? Most of the leasehold properties that I dealt with in the West Midlands were £10 a year ground rent, or at worst, £100 a year ground rent. So I'm not really seeing that this is having perhaps the impact that it will have, or that is intended by the headlines that are being achieved at this moment in time.
It's amazing, isn't it, Hamish, that they seem to juggle around with figures around the edge, but I'm not sure it always makes as much difference as they think it's going to.
I think we've changed the way society runs sort of economically has had a significant change. We can actually sort of take, for example, the taxation on sort of cigarettes, say, for example, and the government in there was, and in fact, it's not a bad idea, because smoking, which was popularized by the Americans after the Second World War, was absolutely sort of rife. You smoked everywhere. It was very rare to sort of walk with, because 6 out of 10 adults were smoking.
Right.
At that particular sort of time. And it was just sort of something. Then all of a sudden, after this populist sort of rise, it was decided, well, actually, it's not good for your health. It's costing our health service. So why don't we increase the tax on it? So they increased the tax. And of course, at the same time as they increased the tax, health awareness actually sort of dropped in there too. And people started speaking about the impact on health. So as he increased the tax on cigarette smoking, there was a bigger decline. So as a consequence of which, the revenue that they're actually sort of gaining from it was far, far less than they ever anticipated. And basically what's happened since, because they keep on rolling out, same on sort of alcohol, all of these various particular sort of things, people find ways of doing it. So when you actually sort of think about it, we go back sort of 50 years ago, nobody would think of buying, if you like, cigarettes from anywhere other than the main source. Whereas these days, there is so much stuff that comes in from the continent, which is under the counter, and it's like anything else. The same with beer. What's happened with the beer? We can sort of see what's happened to the damage that's being done to the sort of industry by increasing this taxation. The biggest and the most serious impact is on things like pubs and restaurants, where people would go to drink and sort of all the rest of it. And what's happening with them, there's a massive decline in the number of those available, because they cannot handle that cost, because people are saying, well, it's a darn sight cheaper. Although it's increased a little bit, it's a darn sight cheaper to go and buy my booze from the supermarket or wine merchant and knock it back at home, because I can save myself the cost, 50% of the cost. So the anticipated income, and I don't know how people calculate these incomes, by doing this, it will make such a difference. So they push the smokers out of pubs, which is a good thing. Get people smoking outside. Now they don't even want them to smoke outside. But what I'm trying to say really is the impact of the majority of these impositions, without a great deal of thought, makes it much more difficult for people to survive. And as Silas explains, there are many, many areas where the ground rent is almost sort of immaterial. But the government will actually sort of use that as an argument. Look at us, aren't we clever? Rather than we've actually achieved something.
Silas, is it all for show?
Well, Gareth, the more I look at it, my short answer to that would have to be yes. I mean, there was this big fanfare around a new regime coming in to power that was going to build 1.5 million homes.
Right. I remember that. I remember what happened to that.
Well, precisely, and when you look at the sort of facts of the matter, it seems to be now that house building has become largely unprofitable. I've seen a lot of developers complaining that sites that would have been profitable 2 or 3 years ago now just cannot be built upon, and so we're actually going backwards rather than going forwards in that respect. The elements of things like this reform. So I was just mentioning before the show started that there was a something that I didn't even know about is the Freehold and Leasehold Reform Act 2024. That had completely slipped under my radar because it's not been publicly advertised that it's actually going on. And so what we've now got is that we've got a conveyancing profession. If you want to talk about the home buying and selling process, the conveyancing profession is under a significant amount of strain with new legislation being thrown at it, new procedures, new ideas. This whole idea of you've got to now pay extra money to access the mortgage lender's handbook, and now you haven't. And there's all of this state of flux going on in an industry that can barely cope with the demand that is being placed on it by consumers day to day. And so I do wonder if this is not a lot of headline grabbing, stay in the media at all points. It's almost like following the Trump example in America. Trump's in the news every day for greater or lesser reasons, but it's not really having the same impact when you're making a loud, bold promise in one respect, and then it's not being followed through with substance. And I think that's the biggest thing that makes people more wary and more cautious of these big, bold promises, because it's not actually delivering the substance behind it. I think if people were going to address the leasehold issues, a couple of things that would need to be addressed would be the time it takes to get a leasehold management pack prepared for a property that's going up for sale. That's one of the biggest areas where we see months of delays, because as far as I'm aware, there are no statutory time limits on how long it takes to compile that information, and there's no set standard yet for the quality of that information. So if you're involved in a chain where there's leasehold properties, that can take months to get that data together before you can even progress the move. And once that data comes through, it's got to be analyzed. By then the searches might be out of date. It's a complete shambles. So if it was me looking at it, I'd want to address that as a pinch point that affects probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people a year trying to move home. That would seem sensible reform.
It seems nuts to me that we are still in a situation, Hamish, that, I mean, your whole business is about generating not just data, but the right data. And I suspect they don't have enough of the right data to be able to say, to make any sense out of it.
Well, the absurdity was that it was around about the lockdown period. I can't remember. And I was trying to help one of our clients out who was trying to sell a flat owned by his mother that he'd been actually sort of left with after her passing. And there were various sort of things coming up, and part of what he needed to do, as sort of Silas indicated there, was to gather together all of this information that was required. And they were waiting for basically information relative to the lease. Right. And I was actually sort of speaking to various sort of different people to help try and speed things up. I was acting in a way in the background there, trying to sort of help them along with things. And one of the things I was actually sort of told at the particular sort of time, and I do hope this has improved now, that there wasn't an electronic copy of the lease. You had to have a paper copy.
Right.
And said, well, we could fax it through to you. I mean, how much page? That's not going to work really, because it's not me that needs it. We need it just emailed through.
Not carrier pigeon or telegraph.
No, I mean, I had to go by carrier pigeon in the end. It was just the thousands of pigeons actually, because of the sheer bloody weight of the whole thing.
Well,
but
quite.
The absurdity of things like that, and like as Silas said, there's a lot of things that could actually sort of be done with the improving the administrative side of certain aspects of it, because leases are so complicated, and also the cost of actually extending a lease. I mean, so many things about it are so complicated, and the least challenge is actually the sort of ground rent. I mean, when we look at the total cost to some poor soul caught up in a flat now, with the increased insurance, with the big sort of demands on the management fees, and the inability to be able to sort of sell that property anyway, no matter how complicated the leasehold is. We just really, it's a sort of one of those, I don't know quite why anybody should mention the subject. It didn't need to be mentioned, other than the fact, I think, this sort of scoring type of mechanism, I think, which is built in with governments. The last government didn't do that, so we'll do it. And then they find out why the last government didn't do it.
Yeah.
They push ahead anyway.
Yeah, it reminds me of Christmas when you have around all the relatives and friends you haven't seen the entire year, and then during that period of time you realise why you haven't seen them the entire year. Anyway, Silas, before I hand back to Hamish to round up, was it trumpeted as the license to print money that it was, or is it an irrelevance, this ground rent change?
Look, to me, Gareth, I think this really is largely an irrelevance. As I mentioned earlier on, it's about the scale or the impact of the reform that's been trying to be achieved. And my major concern, let me just throw a few statistics at this. The average length of time that people stay in their home now has gone from 9 years in the 1980s to over 20 years today, right? Now, if you take that into practical terms, if we look at the advisors to government who is coming up with all of these reforms, my question would be, how many times have you personally bought or sold a home yourself? And the likelihood is it will be once, maybe twice in their lifetimes that they bought and sold a house. And I include conveyancers in this. I include any advisors to governments and civil servants and ministers themselves, as how many times you've actually gone through this process. And without that personal understanding, without dealing with tens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of transactions, you lack the understanding to really know where the bottlenecks are, where the issues are, and actually how to solve them in a practical way. All of these challenges that people are screaming about with home buying and selling reform, all of these challenges have already been worked out. The methodology for change already exists. It's just a lack of education or knowledge that prevents them from becoming mainstream. Okay, that is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, because time after time I'm seeing people getting airtime on social media and talking about the problem without actually tabling any sensible solutions. And that to me is unforgivable when you've got a profession that's drowning, which is conveyancing. You've got a state agency which is massively in decline at the moment. And more importantly, you've got the consumer stuck in the middle. 1.2 million transactions last year that took 4 to 6 months to actually complete, which is unforgivable in the age of technology, when things should be done very quickly, rather than, as to reference Hamish's example earlier, by fax. It's a nonsense that some of these issues are still being presented as problems when the solutions already exist. And that's the bit that I think we need to be cautious of when we're seeing these headlines that are being grabbed at the moment, that there is a better way, but it does require more people coming together to lead that change.
Wow. I've often said to Heather, if it says on the screen 8 out of 10, whatever, believed in this, look at the sample size. It's all about the sample size. If you haven't moved home or been involved in hundreds of transactions, you don't really have the purview or the knowledge base to be able to make statements like that. But Hamish, would you care to take us home?
I will endeavour to. I mean, just what Silas was just saying there, and what we were saying about earlier about the faxing information through, because it wasn't possible to do it sort of online. Why on earth they couldn't scan it into their machine and create the digital sort of copy? Goodness only knows, but there you go. It would have solved an awful lot. It would have made it so much easier for them because you can then actually, there's so much you can do with you, manipulate it, even when you get it that sort of hard thing. Yeah. But anyway, they chose not to. I've been having in my office here, I've had a message coming up. There's insufficient black ink in my printer to print anything. And that's been coming up for a fortnight. So it shows you how much paper that I sort of use. And when we first started our business, everything was on paper. And I mean, I used to sort of think, good grief. And I would only be driving around the countryside, dropping off, 75-page reports and stuff. When you add the leasehold and sort of stuff like, there's more. If you like, you put it all together and put the leasehold and all the complications there, and you've got a bigger book than the Bible. But so there's a lot in there that could actually be improved and made more readily available to help the transaction through. And it's far, far better to concentrate on those matters which are important to people. And I think it's easier, if you like, in some respects, to turn around and say, oh, we fixed ground rent at £250. Yeah, nobody's paying. Well, they obviously are, but you get the drift. Nobody's actually paying £250. It's a bit like some reports we've been doing of late. There's one particular council and sort of says, this has not been, this is not, it's like the installation of windows. This has not been, not received a green grant.
Right.
Now, the thing is, it's not received a hell of a lot of things, but why would you say it's not received a green grant? I mean, that is ludicrous information. And an awful lot of the data and stuff that's floating around at the moment, particularly can say leasehold, like the documentation, is based on laws going back several hundreds of years now. Let's streamline that. Let's make that so much better, easier to understand. So there's so much that could be done in the background there, which would not capture. It would not capture what we wanted to get the media out there. Oh wow, we've improved the freehold, we've improved the leasehold, we've brought out commonhold. I mean, commonhold's been around for over 20 years now, nearly 25 years, but people aren't leaping into it. Why? Because it's seriously dangerous in many, many respects.
Right.
25 so basically, this is what, there's a lot that needs to be reformed, and it's better that it's done from within. And so often we speak of this, it's far, far better than regulation. And I think it's, part of the mantra that both Silas and I have, that, hey, look, let's improve matters from within. And that expands and makes it much, much better for all of those that are involved.
Thank you very much for that, Hamish. I want to thank Hamish McClare, of course, of Search and Convey. Zara has just popped in and stated it's the fact that a leasehold has been exploited for income streams. Zara, I think this is an old story. Find a loophole and exploit it to its maximum extent, and that's what's happened here. So, of course, it's going to be discomforting and disquieting if we move away from that. Thank you, Silas J. Lees of Wiggy Wham, friend of the show, and you'll see much more, hopefully, of that. And to all you watching, I see there's been a whole influx of people. Thanks for watching. Watch out for tomorrow's show, which is at 1 o'clock, called Cladding Matters. That's our most regarded show. 2 weeks ago, I think we had over 18,000 views. Please come along and take it in, and hopefully give your opinion back as well. These are shows which are based on opinion, knowledge, but more importantly, experience. And we'd want to hear about your experiences too. So until tomorrow, keep your hand firmly on the tiller, try and keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and look after that mental health. Until then, bye-bye.